And you are student 3, so not student 2. अच्छा, मैंने student 2 क्या बोला था? Student 2. Student 2 था. ठीक है. And the Tejinder is from? Guru. Okay. ठीक है.
Good morning, everyone. We will be online in a few minutes. Please bear with us. Good morning. Good morning, respected Vice Chancellor Sir, Professor Jaspal Singh Sandhu, Guru Nanak Dev University, Madam Prachi Kaul, Director Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, Professor Sarabjot Singh Bail, Dean Academic Affairs, distinguished speaker Professor Das, Center for Culture, Media and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia, Christian Bartloff, President of Gandhi Information Center, Germany, Dr. Rajesh Kumar, Head of Department of Sociology, professors and heads, colleagues, scholars and students. A warm welcome to one and all to the 2021 Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute's Golden Jubilee Conference and Lecture Series, hosted online by Department of Sociology, Guru Nanak Dev University. Today's series is titled Gandhian Thought and Practice, Perspectives from the Intellectual History of Communication. We are online this morning with support from Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, which is an organization that provides access to educational resources and public lectures of India and Canada's most renowned faculties. We have a total of 150 registered participants from 92 different universities and colleges from India and abroad. We also have participants from academic groups, members of civil society, and advocacy groups. We are so glad to have so many of you with us this morning from all over India, and those of you who have joined us from Germany, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Nepal. I, JESNA JAYACHANDRAN, am pleased to call upon Dr. Prachi Kaul, Director, Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, to share a few words with us. Please, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I would start by saying good morning and good evening, those who are present from India and from anywhere else, any part of the world where it is not evening anymore. So greetings to everyone. Hope all is going well with everyone in terms of pandemic. Thank you so much for bringing out this, proposing this particular talk, which is focused on nation leader. We call him Bapu with all our love and affection. Thank you for putting this together. Gandhiji remains in the core of Shastri's working, I would say, and it's not just so that there have been criticism that we have now recalled Gandhiji or remembering Gandhiji and celebrating 150 years. It's not so. We have been throughout working on Gandhian philosophy and thought ever since Shastri was incepted. So, and there have been crossing of paths in between the ideology of Babuji and Bapuji. Those who are not aware, Shastri Institute is named after Shri Lal Bahadur Shastri Ji, the second Indian Prime Minister. And you know there is a melting and meeting pot and paths wherein the ideologies of these two great leaders from India crosses across, and we have nurtured those two ideologies, and I'm very pleased that the activities like this have been happening on our binational corridor and being supported by Shastri Institute. We focused and with full vigor we have started working on Gandhiji's philosophy and thought in many other perspectives, starting from, a couple of years back when we have our incepting conference at Parliament Hill in Canada. So, and it was, it's a moment to cherish with you that this happened coincidentally in a hall wherein our Prime Minister Shri Lal Bahadur Shastri Ji was honored. So this was an amazing moment to start recalling the thoughts of Gandhiji for today's world, for the greater good of the community. And thereon, we haven't stopped supporting and doing activities and events which bring in and I would say bring in perspective from Gandhiji's philosophy for the whole world, not just India and Canada, but for the whole world. I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor, of course. It's wonderful to meet you again, sir. And Dr. Das for agreeing to deliver this lecture. Dr. Das is the Shastri Fellow, and we have known each other for a long time. We feel proud that he has been associated with Shastri. It's a long association. I think ever since I joined Shastri Institute, we are interacting. Thank you, Dr. Das, for agreeing to deliver this lecture. I'm sure it is going to be wonderful to listen to you. For those who are not aware of the Institute, what it does, because I'm glad to hear that there is a participation from 90 plus institutions. So it is my responsibility to tell you that what Shastri is all about and what we do. So those who are not so well aware about Shastri Institute, our mandate is to build academic and cultural relationship between India and Canada. And how we do it by undertaking programs and providing services that facilitate and sustain binational dialogue, understanding and interaction. These relationship encompasses both institutional and individual linkages. Shastri is a binational organization. We have a unique mandate which operates on two major directions. First, it serves as a financial support system for academic and research programs in terms of offering fellowships and grants and other awards in both India and Canada. This particular lecture is a kind of example how we assist financially. And secondly, it is a binational network of leading academic institutions which are to me, knowledge partners in generating linkages and collaborations. Shastri Institute's awards and programs provide opportunities for recipients to gain first-hand experience, whether it is in India or Canada. Currently, the mobility is on hold because of the obvious reason that we know is due to pandemic. But soon, as soon as the borders are open, international borders are open, we will be resuming the mobility part of our programming as well. Through our vibrant intellectual activities, we try to engage high-level interactions like this one between member institutions in both countries. We are unique in having 155 plus academic institutions on its member council from India and Canada. You name a good university like yours, of course, it is there on board from India side and Canada side. We have been providing opportunity for people to come in from all domain of knowledge and disciplines, and started with humanities and social sciences, but Shastri is now spread over each and every domain of knowledge, which I take pride in saying that we have grown a lot in these 50 years. This particular program is happening under the Golden Jubilee Lecture Series grant, which means that in 2018 we completed our 50 years. We are 52-year-old now and growing very, very strong with the support from our member institutions as well as scholars like you. So thank you for your assistance in helping us growing and providing your inputs in terms of increasing our output, because you are kind of a major stakeholder on Shastri as well. Shastri, of course, focuses on its people. Fostering strong talent is the core of our programming, and developing intellectual and cultural linkages that result into increasing research outcomes and ultimately quality of life and long-term relationships. So we have been doing this in last 50 years, and we promise that we continue to deliver the same for this fraternity, and I hope that GNDU will extend its engagement with Canadian universities with the assistance from Shastri Institute. I congratulate Professor Sandhu for rejuvenating the university's activities. I follow you and I see the developments happening at the university's end. So a lot of credit goes to the top leadership as well for bringing these changes and bringing in good changes, creating a healthy environment at the university campuses. Once again, I congratulate the organizers and the whole team for putting this webinar together in difficult times. And I'm sure it is going to be wonderful listening to Dr. Das. I have other engagements, but I would some point of time would like to hear the recorded talk by Dr. Das. So all the very best. Take care of yourself, and thank you once again for having me here. All the very best.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your very kind words. We are indeed very honored that your institute has granted us this, selected up the talk, the theme, and we welcome you further. I will now introduce the theme of this lecture. I have a short this PPT to kind of share with everyone. Yes. So I will now introduce the theme of this lecture. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is known to all of us as Mahatma Gandhi, or the father of the nation. His life, which we celebrate and commemorate every year as Gandhi Jayanti on 2nd of October, is now also known through the United Nations as the International Day of Non-Violence. There is a great deal of commemoration on this day. And while his thoughts on Swaraj, non-violence and truth are known to all throughout in the history classes in schools and popular culture, there is a lot more to Gandhian thought, its significance and applicability of Gandhi's philosophy 150 years after Gandhi's birth. Today, his ideals are familiar through media constructions and representations, which make up the politics of communication of democracy, nationalism, development, and policy. We do find contestations around the notions of justice, politics, religion, and communication of Gandhian ideals in Panchayati Raj, small-scale industries, public issues such as sanitation, health, and India's poor and marginalized. On the other hand, we have media representations inform public perceptions and the way we understand and misunderstand Gandhi. Before we go ahead with the lecture, I would like to call upon our Dean Academic Affairs, Professor Sarojit Singh Bair, to please share a few words with us. Please, sir.
Thank you, JESNA, for giving me this opportunity to attend this session. The other day we were discussing Gandhian thought and Gandhian philosophy has been very close to my heart because it is one of the rare thought processes and philosophy which will remain relevant for all the times to come. And as we can see today also, that in today's context or in the context of future, these are kind of principles that would hold good for all the times to come. And his concepts of non-violence, which I think is no less than Einstein's theory of relativity, because before that we knew only one way of fighting the oppressor, and that was through raising arms. And it was Mahatma Gandhi who broke that particular, misconception that it is the only way, that eye for an eye is the only way to fight for your rights, but he rather introduced a concept of non-violence and being truthful to one's convictions to the T. And sometimes he's considered quite an extremist in that respect, but I think a person of convictions has to take it to a level where, because he has to be followed by all the people. And even when I see, the political environment, social environment all around me, today also I see a farmers' movement is going on, which again is completely, taking inspiration from what Mahatma Gandhi had taught, and that is why they are able to withstand their ground, and that is how parties have to interact. The moment you take this in another direction, there's always breakdown of any kind of institutions. So I think Gandhi was relevant during freedom struggle also, and he would be relevant for all the times to come. And I had, in fact, an opportunity to interact with Dr. Rajmohan Gandhi, who happens to be great-grandnephew of Mahatma Gandhi. And then I also went through certain books that have been written by Ramchandra Guha on Gandhi, which really bring forward his convictions, character and personality, and his contribution to the modern political and social thought that he had introduced. And Gandhi, basically, if most of you would have, I assume, read his biography, there is an experiment with the truth, which basically is something that completely bases his policies and his philosophies, which, I mean, his self and his policies, his public and his private realm are not two different entities. They are gelled together. They are completely an extension of each other. So unlike the politicians and the leaders of today, who the kathani or karni mein jinka itna fark hota hai, if you see their way of life and lifestyle and the kind of speeches that are made by them, I mean, we need to again follow a role model like Gandhi, who had no differentiation between what he would follow at personal level, and his public life was an extension of that only. So that is how he could, till today, remain the leader everywhere. Even if he's not physically present, he went on to inspire people like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and so many others who later fought their freedom, for their freedom on the policies based on whatever philosophy and thought Mahatma Gandhi had introduced. And his, I think, ability to introspect oneself continuously and keep evolving with every day, because according to him, history was written on every day. I mean, it is not something which is for the textbooks and which remains, boxed up in there. So I think ever-evolving role that a leader or even a common citizen of a country has to, stick to can be, the inspiration of that particular thing can be taken from Mahatma Gandhi's life and his teachings and his philosophy. And I'm really looking forward to the lecture of today. I would be sitting throughout and attending it, though I may go off the video, but I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for arranging such a evocative topic and lecture, which is, I'm sure, which will be contextualized today to today's environment, social and political environment also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bell, for that very inspiring introduction. Now we will go ahead with the distinguished lecture. I would like to, in this context, like looking at what Professor Bell just said, we can also academically look at what sociology and mass communication studies can engage further with Gandhian thought and Gandhi as a master strategist, as an activist, and somebody who is more than a journalist. So I'm sure we can deliberate on this further. And now I'd like to introduce Professor Das. Just 1 second. Having a problem here. Is the screen visible? I think the screen is not visible. Okay. This morning's distinguished speaker, Professor Das, Professor BISWAJIT Das, from the Center for Culture, Media and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia, is a very well-known scholar, educator, and media policy maker in India. His work of over 3 decades in communication policy, in media studies, in sociology of communication is very, very well known, and he significantly focuses on the theory, media, methods, and history of communication in India, media policy as well. So his work at Jamia Millia Islamia at New Delhi is in particular at the Center for Culture, Media and Governance is outstanding. As a founder director for the Center for Culture, Media and Governance, this interdisciplinary center has grown tremendously under his chairmanship, and it is now a center for potential with excellence in media and communication studies 2016 to 21. He is the co-editor of the SAGE series on communication processes, which has 3 volumes on media and mediation, the social and symbolic, and the third one on communication, culture and confrontation. His most recent book is on Gandhian thought and communication, Rethinking the Mahatma in the Media Age by SAGE Publication. Professor Das has published in various national and international journals and books. He has also worked on various academic projects, consultation and evaluation reports on media courses and pedagogies, policies such as ICT, anti-piracy, governance, media use, which has all been submitted to universities, ministries, UGC, Tata Trust, Ford Foundation, as well as UNESCO. He has been a fellow at the University of Windsor, Canada, a fellow at MSH Paris, a fellow at INALCO Paris, fellow again at Charles Wallace Trust, London, and a fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, India. As a visiting professor at York University, he did 4 years of collaborative teaching. He has taught joint courses of York University and Revision University in Canada. Professor Das has signed 8 MOUs with some of the best universities in New Zealand, Belgium, Turkey, Canada, Brussels, and Switzerland. He has also been the recipient of 2 Indo-Shastri collaborative research projects on mediated democracy and India's 2014 elections with York University and Canada. As a media innovator, he has also headed a team that designed a prototype of media diversity in index. There are 8 domains to it, which is a media innovation and a neighborhood research documenting media concentration in the surrounding vicinity of Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Professor Das has been a member of Innovation Council of Information and Broadcasting Ministry, Government of India, member of Joint Committee constituted by UGC, MHRD and Information and Broadcasting Ministry, Government of India to monitor media-related courses in the country. He has been a part of the advisory board of the Consortium of Education Communication, New Delhi, National Council of Rural Institute, and several other distinguished bodies such as UGC, ICSSR, and councils of Government of India. Professor Das is a member of several curriculum advisory boards and committees of different state and central universities as well as colleges. Currently, he is a member of Open Education Resource, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India, Coordinator, Center for Potential with Excellence in Media and Communication Studies, 2016-21, Center for Culture, Media and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia, and the Principal Investigator of EPG Pathashala Program in Media and Communication Studies, where he developed 350 modules under UGC, MHRD and InflidNet. He has contributed 32 EPG modules as main author for EPG Pathashala program, jointly initiated by MHRD, Government of India and InflidNet. He is also the recipient of some awards, the most recent one being Best Media Educator Award in the Professor category, which was jointly awarded by Indian Institute of Mass Communication and Exchange for Media. He is also the founding president of All India Communication and Media Association in India. Please join my colleague Dr. Rachana Sharma and me in welcoming Professor Das to start his lecture on Gandhi. Professor Das, please.
Thank you, JESNA, for such a generous introduction. I have no words to say. extremely anyway. So, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Jaspal Singh Sandhu, a great proven academic administrator, Reverend Dean Academic Affairs, for giving a wonderful initiative and dialogue to begin with this whole notion of Gandhi and its contributions. Also, Dr. Prachi Kaul, who has been a great support to me during these 3 decades and the phases, and that helped me a lot to as a part of a Shastri fellow. I did a lot of work in terms of probably that was the first exposure I had, going to Canada, to Windsor, and doing a lot of contributions in terms of environmental communication. That was in early 94, 95. Subsequently, I have been visiting and signing MOUs or teaching almost in a kind of a, in terms of, even though there is a time zone, coordinations are different, still then we teach evening and they are early morning. So we experimented how it is possible in a public institutions if there are leaders in both the sides. Also, I would like to mention about Honorable President, Indian Sociological Society, Professor Paranjit George, who is a senior fellow colleague of mine and whom we always look forward. I congratulate Guru Nanak Dev University for organizing such a wonderful initiative on the eve of 150 years of Gandhi. And in fact, I'm not let me confess that I'm not a Gandhian scholar per se, but as we know that once we grew as a child, we have been constantly reminded about Gandhi and his ideas and what we should follow. In fact, we should take him as an ideal for all kinds of our actions or our deeds. And this is where I developed a lot of interest. When I started teaching, I teach intellectual history of communication. Very often I receive comments in the class from students about what is an Indian way of engaging with communication. Conventional textbooks and lessons taught are either based on a North Atlantic or Eurocentric ideas. In fact, it's across all the disciplines, not communication studies alone. However, but there is no Indian communication scholarship that tries to indigenize. At least in social sciences, there are tremendous efforts by scholars to indigenize in terms of bringing out intellectuals and thinkers in various disciplines, but we are yet to begin with in communications. And this is the context of my putting together Gandhi, that is the volume which JESNA mentioned about, but that is actually still a data which I gathered, but building a theory probably would be a next exercise. There are no doubt, as I said, that intellectuals whose contributions can be undermined, that informs communications in India. As we know that intellectual history is the study of intellectuals, ideas, intellectual patterns over time. It is different from the history of ideas. For instance, when we talk about communication, it is quite polysemic in meaning. It may be referred as circulation, exchange, articulation, and finally transmission of ideas, and so on. Each of these terms have a checkered history. As a historian of ideas, one will tend to organize the historical narratives around one major idea and will then follow the development or metamorphosis of that particular idea as it manifests itself in different contexts and times. Intellectual history, on the contrary, is often considered to be different from the history of ideas. It tends to regard ideas as historically conditioned features of the world, which are best understood within some larger context. Whether it be the context of social struggle and institutional change, intellectual biography, or some larger context of cultural or linguistic dispositions. What now often we call discourses. I mean, hence we can say that now studying intellectual history would help us to analyze and critique the narratives and Western theories that have constrained scholarship and initiated against the interrogation of ideas and their purposes within India in the field of communication. In fact, studying intellectual history compels scholars to take cognizance of a wider range of methods, texts, and actors that any established canon of Western political thought would permit. I mean, it examines how these ideas are received and reinterpreted by India's intelligentsia in the light of its own intellectual histories. As we know that information and ideas have traveled along complex routes, I mean, serviced by newsletters, runners, petition writers, and information specialists of various sorts in Indian society. In fact, the spread of the lithographic press and the rise of the newspaper and book publishing intensified the dynamism of information dissemination in the subcontinent. I mean, it is from newspapers and, in fact, ephemera, rather than merely the canonical texts of thinkers that we can also reconstruct an Indian intellectual history of communication. I mean, hence, it is quite challenging. In fact, there is a need to revisit Gandhi. In fact, revisiting Gandhian writings is full of possibilities and promise in the realm of communication studies. The question arises, where does one locate his contributions in terms of theory and method? Gandhi was not a theoretician. He did not consciously construct a blueprint, either theory or an ideal social order. He often said that his life was his message. I mean, this implies that Gandhi's ideas and ideals were not codified at one place in the form of a doctrine, but were diffused in the form of his activities. I mean, one has to extrapolate his ideas and ideology from an assemblage of his actions. Gandhi was no Marx, and he did not leave behind an explicitly worked out theory codified in a manifesto. I mean, there is certainly no Gandhian manifesto that we can use today to identify his theory and his vision. Gandhi did leave behind many decades of political and social activities. Gandhi himself said that anyone wishing to follow him after he was dead and gone should simply look at what he did and how he did it, rather than look for any well-codified doctrine. I mean, in fact, conventional studies in social sciences and communications are premised on Western enlightenment and rationality. Critiques, in fact, contextualize Gandhian writings within a narrow confine of modernity's celebration of scientific and technological progress in society. Our disciplinary baggage have exhausted almost all intellectual resources to appropriate Gandhi. But how does one understand quintessential Gandhi that transcends the intellectual wardrobes of scholarly houses and reaches out to the common man on the street? Scholarly assumptions were unacceptable for Gandhi. Gandhi, through his writings, made a trenchant critique of enlightenment premised on the philosophy of progress through instrumental modernity. Gandhi felt such a progress undermined and displaced cultural values and faith from its technologies of enquiry and constructed a new social order around market relations overseen by a secular state. When we read Gandhi, we are moved by his text, not just by his iconic texts such as Hind Swaraj or his autobiography, but by his numerous writings, I mean, correspondences and short letters. Gandhi was metaphorical. He knew how to use the language. He was an experimenter with idiomatic, vernacular expressions of language. Gandhi, as a communicator, was extremely transparent and straightforward. He spoke through multiple platforms. Gandhi was earnest enough to admit that what I say now is what applies. What I said earlier is not true anymore because I have done some thinking since then. I mean, this statement clearly reveals Gandhi as a thinking mind with a deeper purpose behind every act of communication. I mean, however, a communication perspective needs to embrace several facets, even in instances where Gandhi did not succeed as a communicator. I mean, there are occasions where Gandhi's communication was successful because others were around him to make it possible. I mean, what is equally important is the perception. I mean, this perception refers to a kind of a aesthetic dimensions. I mean, that Gandhi was continuously referring to behind each of his communicative action. I mean, this is especially true for the manner in which Gandhi selectively appropriated elements from Hindu mythology in a bid to communicate with the larger public sphere. Besides Gandhi's own act of communication, people organized Gandhi Katha, stories narrated about Gandhi in groups and gatherings that were part real and part derived from his body of work. Gandhi's communication is not only what he said, but also the reception, its interpretation, its reinterpretation, and its creative interpretation, and its wrong interpretation. I mean, they together constitute a Gandhian perspective of communication. In Gandhian thought, the power of a symbol is not independent of the truth of the message. I mean, further, for Gandhi, the medium of as the message works diametrically opposite to the manner in which it was enunciated by Marshall. I mean, in the Gandhian point of view, the message is not independent, and not every medium can carry every message. I mean, the medium is not neutral in the sense of truth and truthfulness. Critiques have not delved into the imagination, metaphor, and the use of symbolic and cultural resources that Gandhian writings and practice carry within. I mean, culture for Gandhi is an activity, a productive activity, something similar to labor in Marx's own words, which produces and reproduces, if not commodities in that sense, but a way of life, a mode of life, which enables to critique, to create, recreate, realize, and therefore transform. I mean, culture for Gandhi is a set of symbols, experiences, signs grounded in the real world. Culture for him rests on the materialities of life. Gandhi used language not in a very strictly formal instrumentalist sense, but for him, being a linguistic being, Gandhi engaged intensively with the language question throughout his life, not only with respect to English language versus Indian languages, but with respect to what should be the language of a country like India. Language for him was a vehicle of culture, of civilization. I mean, civilization for him was not simply in terms of West and East civilizations, but also a question of modernity. What Gandhi brings to bear in this very unusual little booklet called Hind Swaraj is to say that the very basis of value which modernity proposes sits on a hollow ground. I mean, in Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, the word Western civilization is used not in an ethnic sense, but to explain the modern West. It is a marker of what happened in Europe in its transformation to modernity, a transformation of a phenomenal and remarkable order. In fact, the success, the reach, and the depth of the transformations are such that not just the small continent called Europe sacked the world in terms of power, but the very modes of thinking, the very modes of formulation of language itself. I mean, the relationship of that language with the spoken language of ordinary life, the claims of the bridge language, it is not just an arbiter of power and excellence, but about the very possibility of meaningful thought. In the past, it was possible to have classical languages with enormous reach and power, but they never, in any part of the world, could, with some exceptions, displace the natural vigor and resonance of the spoken vernaculars. I mean, the fundamental argument of Hind Swaraj is that the locus of value in modernity, it's sifted out of the human locus into the world of things. I mean, and therefore, the modern quest begins as a quest to make man as the measure of things, has become things as the measure of man. So this is the major difference what he sort of tries to highlight in Hind Swaraj. I mean, it has been reversed. And that is the paradox that Gandhi was addressing. And the word he uses for the way out of this is Swaraj, I mean, which is most interesting word, expressions and concept. I mean, there are three elements of the word Swaraj. I mean, one, Swa, here refers to the individual self, the little life that is given to all of us, but with a profound sense of completeness. And the Swa of the collective, that is social, political otia, but this little Swa in its littleness rests on the infinity of an interior life that never be without transcending cosmic references from whence arise both the sense of loneliness and the quest to transcend and the power to question our own principles, markers of identity, even in the moment of most critical measure. Gandhian ideas cannot be grasped by applying fixed categories and traditional philosophical assumptions. Second, categories plucked out of literary theory do not convey an overall sense of what Gandhi actually stood for. I mean, finally, you can say that his entire worldview has to be located in the proper historic context. Gandhi was a prolific writer. He wrote and spoke always with a context and according to the demands of the situation as he perceived them. Gandhi did not use the word modernity to address the realities of contemporary modern life. He was a great political strategist, and his dialectic is also strategy. He preferred the notions of modern civilizations to analyze the harsh facts that colonial people were facing in India. While talking about a civilization, he focused on the negative aspects of modern civilization, and he often made it synonymous with Western civilization. Gandhi was convinced while writing Hind Swaraj that the chief driving force of Western societies is imperialistic, and its principal agenda for the colonized is to exploit the wealth and other resources from colonial lands for the benefits of the West. Gandhi's emphasis on the negative features of modern civilization has another concrete context. He was aware of the fact that many Indian expatriates in modern language were in the hypnotic grip of all-pervading westernized wisdom that was not good for the welfare of humanity in general and India in particular. I mean, most of the expatriates were patriots in spirit, but their patriotism was limited and constrained due to the wrong political understanding. I mean, in fact, expatriate Indians were ideologues of individual heroic action that had the potential of inflicting violence. I mean, he found this ironically similar to the violent nature of the colonial state apparatus when it came to dealing with the lot of the subjugated people. There was yet another irony that bedeviled the modernist worldview of the expatriate Indians. I mean, they hated British officials, but loved the system designed by them. And they also did not understand the real nature of colonialism. Gandhi, during the South African period, had realized and personally experienced many cases of imperialistic excesses. I mean, he also saw the real face of the proponents of modernity. Gandhi, Gandhi through his Hind Swaraj, tried to interrogate the hegemonic power of the colonial state over the minds of intellectuals and subjugated masses. I mean, while explaining the issues of nationalism, Gandhi understood the necessity of the ground political work and lauded the thoughtful interventions of early nationalists. I mean, he called Dadabhai Naoroji the father of Indian nationalism. He profoundly expressed in Hind Swaraj that religion is a personal matter, and in fact, there are many religions as human minds in this world. I mean, religion cannot be the basis of nationalism of any kind. One should not try to mix the cultural notions of communalism or some other identity with nationalism just to undermine its very positive historical value. Gandhi was of the view that Indians should contribute to the overall knowledge of world civilization and the problems faced by the world in a manner that reflected their wisdom. I mean, at various points in time, he reaffirmed his faith in Hind Swaraj. I mean, there are three possible reasons behind it. First, Gandhi, during the course of the national movement, did develop an instrumentalist relationship with modern technology. He used it, but without really becoming a slave of it. I mean, he did see the total capacity of modern civilization to capture the minds and hearts of the people. Gandhi did not want to deprive himself and the movement and the people around him of the advantages of modern technology. Secondly, Gandhi's political life was actually a series of many failures and disappointments and frustrations. I mean, Chori Chora was one disappointment. Rolet Satyagraha, that is literally holding, it's called firm to truth, was not very successful. In fact, the Bardoli education was not very successful. The peasants paid a huge price for it. I mean, he wanted the Congress to do some spinning. He wanted to make spinning a compulsory part of Congress activities, finding that there were not many takers. He eventually gave it up in 1922. Therefore, Hind Swaraj provided a kind of a psychological cushion for him in the face of failures and setbacks. I mean, the third reason is related to the nature of modernity itself. I mean, although the economic, political, and social superiority of modernity is not in doubt, it was seen as a morally vacuous. I mean, the source of morality tend to dry up. I mean, a hectically mobile, egalitarian, and instrumentalist society finds it generally hard to generate moral resources. In Gandhi's search for morality, Hind Swaraj became a mental signpost. For him, tradition was a huge reservoir of morality. I mean, Hind Swaraj served exactly that purpose. I mean, Gandhi's use of symbolic resources is phenomenal. He termed worker struggle as dharam yudh. One may call it a religious struggle, but it was not a religious struggle in that sense, because dharma for Gandhi again was a very polysemic word, where language was employed in a non-traditionalist sense. Gandhi advised workers to remain firm in their commitment to strike. For him, Satyagraha is a struggle where wresting the best wages possible is not the issue. It is important to hold one's honor and dignity. Gandhi told workers not to rely on finances from outside to survive during the course of the strike. They have to work, and work is very important. A few lessons to learn from this experience. Gandhi interpreted the strike as a moral struggle against injustice. He placed it in the context of a broader struggle, not only in India, but the world over, including South Africa, where Gandhi had a first-hand experience of a successful dharma yudh. I mean, Gandhi wanted the striking workers to act as satyagrahis who would be prepared to suffer for the achievement of justice. I mean, there should be no ill will against the mill owners. He told workers to earn their livelihood by working in the period of the strike and not to depend on contributions from sympathizers. I mean, this sort of, according to Gandhi, is amounted to a dole and would end up degrading workers in the eyes of the employers and others. Gandhi sought to maintain a balance between the interest of both the parties so that none would claim victory, which would obviate a kind of a lasting bitterness between them. His retrospective assessment of the strike was positive because it ultimately resorted to faith among the workers and taught them to remain steadfast in the face of adversity. However, there are partial failure of communication as the ideas which Gandhi wished to convey to the workers as well as to the mill owners were not fully carried through. I mean, in fact, certain methods of communication employed by Gandhi were quite new. In fact, although these newer channels widened his reach, they also created newer forms of misunderstanding. I mean, moreover, the messages which he tried to convey also had a certain novelty so far as the conduct of the labor strike was concerned. I mean, in fact, the whole vivid mythological as well as a secular imagery he invoked was not easy to grasp in the mundane and conflict-ridden world of labor relations. I mean, finally, we can talk about his conceptions of the satyagrahis was quite new and idiosyncratic, and in a way it remained so until the end, and at least for the majority of the people. I mean, certain communication failure was inbuilt in the polysemic nature of Gandhi's various concepts. It does not mean, however, that it was a total failure. Given the challenge he faced in his political career, Gandhi was constantly looking for better and more effective methods of communication all the time. I mean, the open letter and the pamphlets which were used by the early Congress leaders in their agitation. I mean, the pamphlets, for instance, was a very effective means of communication in those days and could really be dated back to Tom Paine's Rights of Man in the 1790s. I mean, in fact, the pamphlet worked at several levels. It's shorter and it was easier to read than a book or even perhaps a newspaper. I mean, in addition, I mean, it could be also easily disseminated as it was also cheap, relatively. I mean, in times of repression, a pamphlet and the very act of its possession itself became a symbol of defiance. I mean, this, for instance, is to be found in the case of something called the Green Pamphlet, which Gandhi brought with him from South Africa year back in 1896, and which listed the grievances faced by Indians in South Africa. I mean, owing to its green color, it came to be known as the Green Pamphlet. I mean, this pamphlet was sold out at its first meeting in India, and thereafter several editions of it were brought out. And the more the government tried to repress it, the more popular it became. I mean, Gandhi's brand of journalism is different. It may be best be referred as advocacy journalism. I mean, Gandhi highlighted about Hindu-Muslim amity, Indian independence, Indian indentured laborers in South Africa, and above all about equality. He started a newspaper to depict the conditions of indentured laborers. I mean, the South African authorities did not make a distinction between a laborer and professional. In 1903, Gandhi started his first newspaper, a weekly in English and Gujarati titled Indian Opinion in Durban. By the autumn of 1903, he began covering the nation's indentured workers. In its first 11 years, Indian Opinion would have almost 196 separate articles with the word indentured in the headline. I mean, in September 1903, the advocacy journalist described these laborers in in this way we can say, I mean, let me try to remember and quote. It's basically said that the indentured Indian is practically helpless. He comes from India in order to avoid starvation. I mean, Gandhi knew that writing about their plight so often would keep them in the public eye. He was setting the agenda in the South African press. When Gandhi took his movement to India, the indentured cause shifted to that of the untouchables, and equality stayed near the top of his journalistic agenda. I mean, similarly, the open letter addressed to the authorities, which would begin by informing people about their latest problems and grievances, served two purposes. First, it addressed the authorities. Second, it educated people about the various issues. Gandhi's Swadesi exhibition in 1923, after the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement, illustrates the power of spinning and weaving. It also provided a unique platform to people from across the country to compete at plying charkha. I mean, the phenomenal success of Swadesi exhibition in 1923 was visited by almost 1 lakh of people. I mean, and thereafter it became a great crowd puller in the following years. I mean, as one of the leading American historian works on Gandhi, who wrote Lisa Trivedi, says that this became a visual means of communication which transcended language. It also explains the centrality of charkha to the concept of Swadesi itself. Gandhi used several such visual symbols to communicate and convey this philosophy. Even the burning of foreign clothes can be seen as yet another visual symbol. The Gandhian Khadi movement responded to the colonial challenge not merely at the level of economics and culture, but also providing alternatives to the colonial science and knowledge system at each and every level. I mean, one of the primary objectives of the Khadi movement was to revive household spinning by challenging the notion of inferiority of Indian cotton production. I mean, for this, the Khadi movement had to look at the alternative indigenous crops. The response of the Khadi movement was not one of culture only, but very much a technological one too. I mean, talking about their sense of the scientific method, Gandhi once remarked, no science has dropped from the skies in the perfect form. I mean, all sciences develop and are built through experience. I mean, in fact, the spinning wheel was very soon appropriated as a symbol of loyalty and an image to reflect a true nationalist spirit by Gandhian leaders. I mean, it was a symbol of identification for Congress leaders, regional leaders, often circulated their photographs depicting quite prominently the charkha, Gandhian cap, and Khadi dress. The Khadi campaign sought to divide Indians into two classes. I mean, one who believed in it and wore Khadi, and those who did not. I mean, however, Gandhi's class division was enforced non-violently, though it was not entirely free of coercion. I mean, it provided a mobility of passage from one class to another. His emphasis on non-violence was intended to provide a possibility for the transformation of an individual's political alignment. Wearing Khadi, in that sense, was a transformative experience. I mean, one could change one's class affiliation through personal conviction and a change of the heart. I mean, in that sense, Khadi became an ideological symbol on which one's political and personal beliefs could be vindicated. I mean, one's clothing became an index of one's political affiliations. A formal recognition of the choice regarding clothes did not arise as an actual outcome of Khadi. I mean, the dilemma of choosing Khadi or other clothes was enforced through a sustained campaign. Khadi's core semiotics lay in it being presented as a commodity of colonial resistance. I mean, in refurbishing charkha, there was the use of tradition, but the new reinvented charkha was put in the service as a modern carrier of import substitution. Khadi gradually transformed itself into political fabric. A wearer of khadi became, in the eyes of authority, a rebel. Khadi's transformation from clothing to a political uniform gave the cloth a character. It became a commodity of conscious choice. The ideological investment in khadi enhanced the character of the cloth. Finally, while looking at the elements of nonviolence in various traditions and the sociology of nonviolence, Gandhian nonviolence, both in theory and practice, was deeply rooted in the Indian conditions. However, it is important to look upon both types of influences, Indian and Western, on Gandhi. I mean, on the one hand, the influence of Satya, Ahimsa, Austere, Aparigraha, and Brahmacharya, these are the 5 pillars of Indian tradition, is very explicitly visible on Gandhi. On the other hand, the influences of Protestantism is also there. In fact, the two harmonized with each other at many levels. I mean, Gandhi's Karma Yoga has its parallel in some Calvinist tenets and principles. Also, the notion of parity of means and ends. I mean, that is sadhan and sadhya. Gandhi is also not opposed to technology per se or to the entrepreneurial pursuits, but the entrepreneur should behave like trustees. All this is quite close to Calvinism. I mean, according to Calvinism, an ideal man is one who utilizes his skills in the interest of mankind. I mean, skill of gradation is quite acceptable to God. And according to Calvinism, this, along with the emphasis on saving, constituted the basis for moral capitalism in Europe, in fact. Gandhi's notion of trusteeship comes quite close to the Calvinist notion of moral capitalism. I mean, but this moral capitalism collapsed in Europe and was replaced by instrumentalist, rationalist capitalism. Gandhi was only trying to introduce a model in India that had failed in Europe. I mean, so we can say that what failed, I mean, was it the notion of moral capitalism that was replaced by instrumentalist capitalism, or was there an actual transition from one type of capitalism to another? When did this transition take place? I mean, can we really say that there was anything moral about early capitalism? Was it also not more, some ways more brutal, as was pointed by Marx or even Dickens, than later capitalism? It is also the, so even in this sense also, one can also connect with the Toynbee that was not correct in positioning East against the West or in equating utilitarian modernity with the West. Gandhi's practice could not be totally appropriated by either of the two models. This is also borne out of Gandhi's exposition of the feature of true satyagrahi. These are religion, non-violence, no hatred against the enemy, and a constant willingness to convert the enemy, and a preparedness for an honorable compromise or a settlement. I mean, a satyagrahi must practice moral flexibility as against both moral obstinacy and opportunistic flexibility. I mean, yet another misunderstanding also is related to Gandhi's notion of Daridra Narayan. The allegation is that Gandhi celebrates poverty. The allegation is that Gandhi celebrates because, in fact, Tagore also thought so, but Gandhi makes a distinction between poverty and deprivation. His notion of positive is positive, not negative. It is close to the Protestant idea of suffering and the Buddhist notion of karuna, that is pity. Gandhi's notion of daridrata, that is poverty, is inclusive of both suffering and karuna. But it is influenced more by Buddha, not Christianity so much. So this is where, so now the question arises that how relevant is Gandhi's nonviolence in today's context? The question needs to be handled, I would, at three levels. I mean, individual, at the social system, and the environment, you can say, that scholars opined that the transformation of the social order were more important questions and did not see much of a role for nonviolence in that. I mean, their cynicism was actually rooted in the times. I mean, incidentally, so anyway, so we can talk about that. Incidentally, when we compare Mao and Gandhi, we say that Mao's People's Revolution had certain features in common with Gandhi, like sending intellectuals to village, equal dignity for a manual as against intellectual work. But in its coercive aspect, it was fundamentally different from Gandhi. But the context had changed now in many ways. The issue of environment has surfaced again itself. I mean, there has generally been a disillusionment against the trajectory of modern economic development. Europe has taken the lead in the protection of the environment. There also has been a shift towards vegetarianism. I mean, all this has brought Gandhi back into reckoning. Gandhi is being resurrected also because of the communication revolution. In fact, the communication revolution has helped to curb state power. The new slogan in Europe is reinvent democracy and reinvent government. People are not happy with the older forms of democracy in which governments are elected for a certain period and rule unchecked for that period. I mean, the new technology has also made decentralization at workplace or possible. Minority views now can find better representation. The internet has removed the mystique of the author. Now anyone can be an author. New technology has created and is creating a new culture which is closer to and conducive to Gandhi's ideas. So the new context, disillusionment with the modern economic development, plus the new realization about the environment has convinced people about Gandhi's relevance. And new technology makes it possible to practice some of his ideas. So the new times are marked both by a recognition of the desirability and also a feasibility of Gandhi. But the new technology has also made the state more powerful, interventionist, and coercive than was ever the case. I mean, the state can bring everybody into surveillance. What is more, people are now willing to surrender their freedom and give it to the state in return for protection. This is an irony. In earlier times, state used to try and appropriate people's freedom. Yet another feature of the new context is that the new capitalism, through its corporate houses, has fully realized that it has to be welfareist in order to be successful. Hence, inclusive, moral, and responsible capitalism has made an entry through the back door. I mean, corporate world has begun to realize the importance of people in its own interest. Consumer market can grow only if poverty is eradicated. There is a large and prosperous middle class, and if there is enough literacy. So the presence of substantial number of healthy, literate, and prosperous population is in the interest of the corporate world. And this can also prevent a revolution and a revolution-like situation. This also fits into Gandhi's ideas. I mean, yet another importance of Gandhi's ideas in today's world is his repudiation of his artificial divide. That is the false dichotomy between faith and reason. Gandhi's actually linked faith with reason. He showed a lot of faith in reason by talking of experiment with truth, but also told people to practice reason in their faith. I mean, often people talk of applying the Chinese models in India, so they say that how, but I think it was clearly, you can say that Indian condition is characterized by its individuals, certain independence, centralized monitoring, and state control, multi-stranded traditions, and a spirit of reconciliation. I mean, all these features feed into Indian economic and political developments. So I would like to just conclude by saying that my presentation, in fact, what I spoke so far is some of the core issues that may be discerned from Gandhian writings and contributions so as to develop a starting point for any creative engagement with Indian communication. I mean, it deals with the question of knowledge, practice, and strategies of communication. And finally, relevance of Gandhian communication in the present era. I mean, any discussion on the knowledge of communication in Indian society needs to address these key attributes and that contributes to the formation of communication and the constitution of Indian society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very much,
Dr.
Dr.
discussion. So I sum up this session with the note that as we commemorate the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the Mahatma, it is an occasion for us to remember him as not just the greatest communicator of 20th century, but also as an ideal for 21st century. So Gandhi, as Professor Das shared, was not just a votary of freedom of speech and expression, but also the greatest communicator because his communicational approach was built on the concept of empathy. So he delivered his content fearlessly because he knew what he was speaking was coming from the heart of the masses. So Professor Das' lecture, it has showed that how Gandhi used his voice and power of communication to enlighten and voice the concerns of the different sections of the society and communicate the fair content fearlessly. So your lecture, sir, it is particularly appropriate at this time when the communication and media is demonstrating the power the people have in giving a voice to the oppressed. So I conclude here saying that the relevance of Gandhian philosophy in this time when the communication and media is demonstrating the power that people have in giving a voice to the depressed and the oppressed sections of the society. So I would say that the relevance of Gandhian philosophy in the contemporary times it lies in his powerful messages which represent his personality and philosophy holistically. And the message is that if words can be powerful, so is the silence. So with this, I thank you, Professor Das, for acquainting us with this aspect of Gandhian philosophy and his personality. And it was a very interesting and illuminating presentation. So I'm sure from your lecture that our attendees will have benefited hugely and they have drawn a lot out of it. So as I can see, some questions pouring in our group, which we have formed for this lecture. So before taking up this Q&A session, I would like to share with you all that we are very happy to see the overwhelming response that we have received for this lecture by our distinguished speaker, Professor BISWAJIT. So I would like to share with you a little bit of presentation, like a little bit of presentation informing us about the social and spatial profile of the participants which we have received from not just India but also outside of India. So please just give me a few minutes to share my presentation. So this is the data like for the past 2 days that we have with us. So we saw a registration of total 160 participants and yes, so 160 participants and this is like the analysis of the participants which we would like to share with you all. So we had before this final day of the lecture, we had 132 participants who had registered 2 days prior, and as you can see, they come from various diverse fields like universities, high schools, industry professional, consultancy groups.
Ma'am, you are visible. We can see the screen.
Yeah, just a minute. I am presenting. Can you not see the screen? I have shared my presentation. Is it not visible? I will try it again. Just a minute.
We seem to have some technical issue here. We would like to, just before we go ahead, I think Yeah, oh, Rachana is here.
Yeah,
Madam
ma'am,
Rachana
is
is
it
being
visible?
joined. Yes, yes, you're visible, ma'am.
No, the presentation, my slide, is it visible now?
Yes.
Visible. Please
Yes.
go ahead. We can, I think, we'll just wait before
Yes,
Madam
is it
joins.
visible?
We can now,
Is it visible now?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
very much.
Okay. So these are like participants from various institutions and universities, like 92 universities and academic institutions. And then this is the diversity of our participants. So we have largely participants from universities, and these are from various disciplines. So large participation we saw from sociology, political science, communication studies, and this is the gender breakup. So this is our breakup of the participants, faculty members, research scholars, and undergraduate students. And this is the spatial distribution of the participants which we have seen.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so it is representative of all of the states of India. So thank you very much, Professor Das, for acquainting us with this aspect of Gandhian philosophy. So I, with your kind permission, now start with the Q&A session. And dear participants, we have some 30 minutes with us for this session. So
Okay.
I request all of the participants to be very brief with their questions. So we have our first question coming in from Mr. Ranveer Gautam. So he's a PhD scholar at Guru Nanak Dev University and head of the department at Rathod University, Rajasthan. So over to you, Ranveer.
Yeah.
Ranveer Gautam.
Uh, uh, Thank you so much, ma'am. Uh, Thank you so much, sir. Biswajit, sir. I, listen a lot of lecture in Jamia Millia Islamia. So my question is, related to the idea of fraternity and communication. So what about Gandhi's alienation of the untouchables, that is Harijan, by denying them meaningful political power or alienating them by naming them Harijan without their consent and demand? What does that mean Gandhi's outlook on fraternity? My second question, a bit related to you just relate the Gandhian idea of trusteeship with moral capitalism of Calvinism. But if you see, there is no scope or the sense of aparigraha in moral capitalism of Calvinism. So I don't think it's correct to relate Gandhi's idea of satyagraha with trusteeship with the moral capitalism of Calvinism. That is very, it will, incorrect way of understanding Gandhi's. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think discussing about Gandhi in the present context is subject to appreciation as well as a lot of criticisms. So, this whole subaltern or even the Dalit studies or Dalit consciousness, probably, which is a matter of just last it's come out as a kind of a body of literature, and which is providing an alternative perspective, and which also needs to be more and more problematized and worked probably, and it has grown in a big scale. So there is, and that provides an alternative ways and another way of engaging with. So I'm saying that what Gandhi did, Gandhi looked at during a particular time and a moment. In fact, our entire disciplines are under stake today. Why Gandhi alone? You look at sociology, or history or political science, the kind of a perspective orientation in which we have addressed all these disciplines, probably we need to re-question all these disciplines, and that we are now undergoing within the last 2-3 decades. And there is a serious integration of these disciplines. In fact, I would say that now gradually we are making an induction, even now trying to talk about sociology, in fact, is one discipline which has been extremely branded as a highly upper caste or a casteist kind of an orientation. And this is where people have been saying. But the question is, see, there is an epoch, there is a historical epoch, the context in which it has been looked at. So one cannot undermine the importance, the contribution as an intellectual. I'm saying that what Gandhi wrote, in fact, he wrote during a particular time and particular context. In fact, and there are so many things probably we don't know. In fact, when we talk about alternatives, perspectives, looking at Gandhi's notion of Harijan, what he mentioned, there are also freedom struggle where how Dalits were they part of a freedom struggle movement, which is probably, in fact, I remember a scholar doing work on Kanpur tannery and trying to say during the Simon Commission that most of the tannery owners, they so-called used Dalits, those who were owned these tanneries in Kanpur, they strongly supported the Simon Commission rather than supporting the Indian National Congress. And they also got patronized and Sir, all kinds of British awards and other things. So the question is, it will be a larger historical bubble now, which is open to us to work. So the question is, you have every right to question the very idea of why Gandhi used the term Harijan. So it's a Harijan, the term is basically bringing from a kind of a classical text and sort of trying to look at Hari. They're the sons of, so the question is, they're the noble sons. But anyway, this is a language he was just playing. I said that one needs to decode the meanings which are encoded in when we say about Harijan. Not we should take it in a little sense, but anyway, but this has been time and off and on, it has been raised this issue that why he used the term Harijan. So I think that will be more and more, I'm sure my fellow sociologists would be more keen to talk about it because I have not touched upon that issue more in a focused manner. I'm sure that I would sort of try to look at this question and try to probably come out next time with a good answer to that. Regarding fraternity or trusteeship, you see, Gandhi always believed in trusteeship. I mean, this is an interpretation. This is an interpretation where we can also look at how he sort of tried to combine this Calvinism and sort of trying to build the idea of trusteeship. I mean, in fact, whether in ashrams or anywhere, he built in this idea of trusteeship, which he managed well. In fact, Gandhi ashrams all around, you will see that they have successfully run and they have been so organized and also believe in a kind of a trusteeship. So in that sense, I will not be fully, agree to your statement. But I see there are Gandhians. There are Gandhians here in this particular gathering. I'm sure that they will come out with interesting insights about, what the idea of trusteeship, how they look at it. In fact, we have people from Germany and Nepal, and I'm sure that they will give that how they run this idea of trusteeship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thank you very much, sir. So the next question comes to you from Mr. Namit. Mr. Namit, please.
Yeah, very good afternoon, ma'am. Very good afternoon, sir. So my question is regarding the approach of Gandhi in terms of various discourses, as Nehru had quoted in his book, which NDT had published, Nehru and Gandhi, where he has discussed the idea, his engagement with Gandhi, and he's pointed out that whenever he had a discussion with Bapu in regard to any issue of national emergency, his approach would deviate away from rationality and would be way more philosophical in nature. So I wanted you to kindly illuminate a little bit on that as to how Gandhi should be interpreted, whether rationality of his was somewhere imbibed within his larger philosophy, or his approach to rationality was completely different, which in itself took a little bit more time for leaders like Nehru to understand the larger issue in terms of that. Thank you, sir.
Let me respond to your question in a Gandhian style. I mean, what the idea, it actually reminds me Louis Fisher, who is the autobiographer of Gandhi. He wrote that the distinction between Jinnah and Gandhi. He said that Jinnah is just like a gramophone record, and Gandhi is just like. Let me start with what he said about. He says that Jinnah is just like a gramophone record which keeps on playing, and there are sounds and scratches in the record. Sometimes you can hear, and that you listen when Jinnah speaks. But when Gandhi speaks, he takes away your question, reformulates for the next answer, and then he will give you a question back. So that is what Gandhi is. Gandhi is actually a thinking mind. Gandhi's thinking mind, even his answers are also a continuous process of thinking. Now, what you talked about Gandhi and Nehru, there was a poles apart in terms of their perspectives and their understanding. Nehru was much more an urbanite. Gandhi was more and more keen towards the people in the villages, in the countryside. And in that sense, Nehru was anti in that sense. I mean, my earlier writings where I mentioned that how Nehru's approach and about rural India and Gandhi about rural India and the notion of community in that context, that how there are variations in that context of Gandhi's talking about village India, going back to the villages and working, which is Nehru is completely anti to that whole idea. In fact, Gyan Prakash, a leading historian, writes about it extensively. But so this is where I think I already mentioned in the beginning that whole project of Western modernity, that whole idea of rationality and enlightenment. Gandhi was very critical about it. So that is what I would like to say, that Nehru is a product of the Western science, Western modernity, and rationality. I think there was a poles apart in terms of their in their engagement. But however, they came together. So that's a different story altogether. But I think Gandhi never supported, in fact, the Western European rationality at all. So I think there was a problem of language, of communication between them, because they could not, in that sense, probably. This is my reading, my understanding. I'm sure that others, those who work specifically on Gandhi history, probably they would say something. But I do not think, because when I was sort of trying to engage with my readings about Gandhi's visit, going back to the village, that was strongly opposed by Nehru itself. So I'm saying that the whole perspectives, orientations are different. Gandhi probably, that is where we see that what a shift takes place from 50s onwards, the way we look at development and progress in societies. So it's a different trajectories which we have, a kind of a populism, a kind of a development, what probably Gandhi is never thought of. So I think somewhere we have left Gandhi to the corner, and the way we have developed a science, so-called scientific progress and development and so on. So it's a Nehruvian, we call it It's a till 80s, 90s. It's a Nehruvian development, Nehruvian project of modernity. So I think now we can see that now scholars should critically engage and assess what actually now already scholars have started commenting on this idea of Nehruvian progress and Nehruvian modernity. But I'm not critiquing Nehruvian modernity. But what I'm saying is that look, now we have a different strands of thinking and possibilities are there. So I think there is a difference. There is a difference, of course, in terms of Gandhi's and Nehru. These are different scholars and intellectuals, and they have to be looked at different ways. So I will not say that. So the question is, there are diversities of views and interpretations. So I do not say that they all look alike. So that is a quality of Indian intellectuals, and which we need to appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So next question from Bhavna Basu.
Good morning, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this wonderful session, and I would like to congratulate the Department of Sociology for organizing such a wonderful lecture. And I have, got an opportunity to hear from such intellectual people like you. So my question is that as I've seen in 21st century, in this particular year only, we are all the evidence for this farmers movement, which is still going on in Delhi. So not in Delhi, in fact, the whole of the India is a part of it. So, sir, how Gandhian ideology is augmenting the various socio-political movements going on in India? So I would like to know the relevance, the help this ideology is giving to the socio-political movements, or the too much conformity to the society, social norms or political order is creating another problem for civil society. So I would like to know your views on this, that how, up to what extent the Gandhian ideology of the non-violent and very peaceful manner protests in front of government is augmenting social political process. And this question is yes, sir.
Thank you, Bhavna. I have not yet actually seriously looked at the movement, but I have been following, like you, as an avid common man. I'm watching television, reading newspaper, and that is what at the moment my engagements are. It's not a very serious engagement, but what apparently I see that the movement is so well organized. It's Gandhian, absolutely, and it has a strength. It has built a character. This movement has built a character. So this movement has built a character, and we see that now it spreads out. So the question is, one needs to study the trajectories, the way it is taking a direction, and it is also giving a new dimension to what you call all the new social movements. We need to understand that once we say that we are looking at non-violence, but at the same time there are forces which sort of tries to make all kinds of dents to the entire process, and how to lessons to learn from these and how to move forward. This is actually a whole trajectories of social movements are. So the question arises that how, in spite of all these hurdles, how still the movement continues. It also organizes so well, and it has done it. That actually gives a credence to the entire movement. I think somewhere that we need to understand that Gandhi has given us a language of movement, the whole protest, the whole satyagraha, the whole non-violent means of organizing a protest that may be used as a counter interventionist tendencies. At the same time, it can be also used as a kind of a force. So we see if you recall, Narmada agitation, if you recall, that when Baba Amte entering into Gujarat, where the former chief minister's wife and the entire women, they just slept on the road, and they said that Baba Amte, if you want to enter, we are also on a fast, we are also on a hunger strike, we are also doing fasting to death, and you have to go on our body. So I'm saying that, see, how Gandhi's, at least he has given us a language of protest. He has given us a language of protest, and at least we must appreciate, and we should work further. So Gandhi has given us an entry point. So I'm saying that we need to work on it. So at least we are happy that, look, Gandhi gives us an idea that how to organize protest. You look at the entire history. So we should study the kind of symbols which are used, the kind of expressions, the kind of movements, the kind of walks. I think these are issues which we have not studied, which we have not ventured much to study. Even padiyatras, the styles of walking, the styles of walking. You see, it interests me a lot that we need to learn a lot from Gandhi's entire mannerisms, the way he carried, the way he conducted. And I think because either history and, what happened and why he said, much has been talked about. I'm not interested in that at all. What I'm trying to study is actually what are the possible unexplored terrains where we need to understand Gandhi. If we want to see Gandhi, who's a part of our subconscious all the times, every time we look for an answer, we go to Gandhi and we say that, look, Gandhi is the answer. So I'm saying that why is it so? Because have we done enough, or do we have enough intellectual resources to understand what Gandhi did and how he did? This is where I'm interested more in sort of deconstructing, looking at each and every movement, or even how Gandhi did organize, because Gandhi continuously moved. He never got stuck anywhere. He said that what I thought today, I'm not thinking tomorrow. I'm saying that, this is where we need to understand that how we understand such a thinking and a dynamic mind, that how we can locate it as an intellectual. We may disagree with a lot of ideas. I said that, look, in order to be a successful communicator, you don't need to always show the path of success. There are failures. I mean, in my presentation, I talked about there are several failures which Gandhi had. In fact, Gandhi, for your information, Gandhi contested election in Gujarat and he lost. He lost. After that, he never contested any election for that matter. So the issue is that we always look for a templates. We always look for a kind of a templates. We always look for a litmus paper test, on Gandhi, and trying to see, Gandhi didn't see this, Gandhi didn't do that. It's not. Gandhi wrote, Gandhi saw the occasions, Gandhi contributed immensely, and now we need to see that how we connect and relate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. It was indeed quite a lovely presentation, I must say. And I also congratulate the organizers. It's been a while since I saw all of you, especially the people from Guru Nanak Dev University, due to the pandemic and everything. So my question is to you that since you spoke about resurrection and communication of Gandhi, so my question is that how in the present times the Gandhian thought has resurrected? Is it because of the individuals who hold critical views of Gandhi? Solely because of that, or there are other factors? Of course, Gandhi is quite relevant, but
I think this is a very, very interesting question. I would say that let me engage with this in broadly in two ways. One is an individual resurrection. The other one is an institutional as well. I mean, if you ask me as a field worker, when I go to different parts of the country and I look at it, I had a lot of interest when I'm doing field work and I'm seeing Gandhi in calendar, Gandhi in frame, and you go to every bureaucrat's office and you see behind the bureaucrat's chair, there is a Gandhi hanging on the wall, and sometimes Gandhi looks very angry, anxiety prone, somewhere he's smiling. That also, there is a semiotics of all these frames. In fact, we never study what I call it. I had an interest probably 2 decades back. I call it, it's like a floating signifier. I mean, Gandhi is just floating everywhere. No matter wherever you go, you would like to catch. The question arises, probably you need to study not only representation of Gandhi even the reproduction of these photographs and frames, why certain technologies produced Gandhi in a particular way, and what is the quality of technologies. That's where, we just not look at the pictures and comment on Gandhi. We need to also look at the production behind these representations. So that is another way of doing it. So institutionally, there is a patronized, the institutions also patronize Gandhi, popularize Gandhi, Gandhi Katha, Gandhi stories. It has come out in such a way that as a child, when you grow, you listen, you read, you listen from various sources. So there are other sources that makes Gandhi as a successful. Gandhi is presented to you. So I'm saying there is an institutional effort ever since. Also, there is an individual effort that how you look at a person's, you are completely amazed with the kind of a personality, the kind of contributions, the kind of scholarship he has done. My readings of South African the movement where Gandhi did, in fact, bringing out newspaper. In fact, I do not see that we can do such kind of a journalism today. We can't think about journalism today in what Gandhi did. Imagine Gandhi bringing out a newspaper, straight away writing about advocating the indentured laborers. Can any journalists who are paid journalists can have the guts to do such kind of things today in a newspaper? In fact, they can't write. They're constrained by the editors. They're constrained by the management. So it is more management rather than journalists today who has taken over the newspaper. So journalist has no space today in the media sector. It is the management. It is not the journalist at all. Now look at Gandhi. Gandhi started a strand of journalism. In the beginning, in India, unfortunately, none of our media schools ever think about understanding what an advocacy journalism is. We all start with the idea of how our entire orientation about journalism is so scanty and so skewed that we try to teach the same age-old Western models and how press is a fourth pillar of, it's all rubbish. It's all rubbish. It's a total garbage. And what the media schools are teaching, so-called journalism schools, they do not understand the whole notion of fourth estate, and is an idea which actually came in 17th century, 18th century in England, where the idea of democracy is maturing. It's being nurtured. The idea of nobility, contributions to, fourth estate, another estate which is independent of. So it is democracy. It is actually it is nurturing. And in 19th century in America, it was matured. And then it was exported to all over the world. So that is what we have today, an idea about journalism today. We call it journalism nurtured in England, matured in, it was brewed in England, matured in America, then exported as a scotch to all over the world. So that is what you see. So journalism is another form of ism. I call it journalism is another form of ism. So you divide journal and ism. So it's like another form of ism. Now, when the entire West has critically challenged journalism, they do not aspire anymore. They do not agree with this idea of journalism. But still in India, we continue in our school. We never thought about what is actually an advocacy journalism. You go and ask any media schools today, you will not find in their entire analysis and studies, they talk about advocacy. But today, you look at media channels, it is a time that where you need to critically engage with the medias today, you find that there are one or two, besides one or two, news channels who straight away start with advocacy journalism. So the whole spirit is gone today. So now, why should we talk about what was the spirit and intent of 18th century? The contexts are different. Democracies are under as completely seized. You see the way democracies are. What democracy are we talking about? I think we need to revisit all these foundational concepts today. We need to revisit all these foundational concepts to look at completely democracy is in a seize. It's not only, across the world. Across the world, you find that democracies are in seize today. There is a total chaos what is happening. So we do not have that kind of a comfortable stay. So, but as a part of a nation building project, you find that you have a father of the nation, and it also helps in a way to institutionalize project. And that is where you talk about Gandhi's being Gandhi centenary, then Gandhi Katha, then you find it has help in a big way. And of course, because you need to have a part of a nation building project, you need to have a national hero, national father. So you need to, it helps in institutionally and also individually. If you look at that, how we look at the idea of Gandhi's sense of morality, Gandhi's sense of truth, Gandhi's sense of contribution. So very fearlessly Gandhi has been. So I find that, look, it's a, we need to more critically engage about what is an institutional biography, what is an individual, that how we see together that where things are, where they match. But I think there is a potential to look at that, why there is a mismatch in India, what happens to an institutional patronization where there is a crisis, why suddenly it becomes a mere ritual, what to call it, becomes a mere ritual, like doing every year Gandhi Jayanti is a ritual. I mean, so in that sense, I would call it that we have to perform a ritual. Ritual has its own significance, that it's like a mere ritual and rhetorics, what we do. Or is it that suddenly we realize seriously that we need to think about Gandhi, whose contributions, whether it is in terms of nature and ecology, environment, and Gandhi's notion about peace, non-violence, ahimsa. So there are tremendous potentials. So we need to seriously look at, and this is the time that we need to more engage with our own indigenous ideas, that how, I mean, they all engage with the Western philosophy and scholars. I mean, we can't say that Gandhi probably has engaged much more. So we don't know, but he wrote it in a simplistic style and connected to people, rather than I put 1,000 names and say that, look, Gandhi did not mention or use name, but Gandhi has been continuously engaging with all of them. So I think we need to more, our scholarship should now more gear towards our indigenous contributions and look at them, whether it is a Gandhi or Ambedkar, and also because all of them are great intellectuals. All of them are great intellectuals. And we need to now think that how we need to bring them and to the forefront and see that how they can be useful. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Sir? Hello?
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question is, since Gandhian thoughts were developed during independence struggle, so how far that Gandhian ideologies are applicable in the modern era, in our present context in India, so it will help us in development and the growth of the country as a whole. That's my question, sir. Thank you.
You see, Gandhi never, I told in the beginning that Gandhi never developed like Marx, a codified principle. Gandhi never sort of tried to, he never was interested in that at all. We are rather, I mean, trying to appropriate Gandhi. You see, we need to understand, we are trying to appropriate Gandhi to all our disciplines. So you say political science, sociology, even what I sort of trying to do in media, or even everybody. I'm not interested to say that Gandhi was a great journalist. No, I'm not. I mean, I don't want to demean Gandhi by saying that Gandhi was a journalist. He was an intellectual. He's a public intellectual. He was a public intellectual. He contributed on immense. So I'm saying that Gandhi, probably his ideas would be important in looking at certain things. But what Gandhi said in a particular point of time in history is completely different what the present era is. So let's be more focused. Let's be more focused on looking at in what way it can be, what way it can be extended, Gandhian ideas, to understand the context. I will not say that Gandhi will give a complete blueprint to understand the contemporary issues. What I'm saying is that we have to extend Gandhian understanding, but almost 7-8 decades, much change has occurred. I think the change has occurred in a very fast pace, very fast pace. So you need to revive and rethink how you relook at it. It's not about that whether we can, Gandhi will provide a full answer. Gandhi will provide a full answer, but the beginning of understanding itself is a noble attempt. That's what I'm saying. Let's not think about Gandhi will give you a complete plan of action. I mean, no government today will confine to any specific plan of action today. But because today no nation states are confined to itself, they're a part of a global entity. They're a part of a global entity. Because once you open up your floodgates, in fact, Gandhi, if you read 1920 in Harijan, Gandhi is the first guy who says, let my feet remain grounded. Let my feet remain grounded. Let all the windows and the roofs be open. There cannot be a better statement about globalization, what you are saying in 90s. He says, let my feet remain grounded. Let all the roofs and the tops are open. So let all ideas come from different parts of the world. If you recall in 90s, we have been all writing about what will happen to cultural invasion, globalization, cultural invasion. Gandhi never bothered about it. Gandhi said, let my feet remain grounded. Let all the windows and roofs be open. Let it come and go. So they will come and go. So as long as I'm grounded, nothing is going to change. So that's the idea. But the kind of language which we used, we said about cultural invasion, Star TV, cultural invasion, and so on. Invasion itself is a very strong military metaphor. It's a strong military metaphor. And by using the term invasion, we are saying that we are always bringing these metaphors to say that there will be a complete overthrow of our culture, imposition of Western culture, homogenization of culture. I mean, suddenly when globalization term came, everybody got worried and panicked about what is going to happen. We will be all homogenized, all English and all Americanized, Coca-Colanization. I mean, these are all fancy, simplistic, very commonsensical assumptions. I mean, so that's why we say that when globalization came, broadly three things. What is globalization? We all jumped into comments on what it might create. So that's our all apprehensions about globalization. How globalization is going to affect, probably we did not do much work, much more field work or ethnography or try to study intensively in what way it will change policy in whatever. So why? So these three dimensions. So most of our initial observations and comments are based on what is globalization, how it is going to affect. So Gandhi never bothered at all. I mean, India is different. India is from the very beginning, it is a global. It is not that ever, we were always linked with the global forces from the very beginning. It's nothing new. So I would say that, look, you need to understand that it's not about Gandhi is giving a blueprint or Gandhi has developed himself a blueprint to understand. We are bringing Gandhi to understand the present context. I mean, it's not he has given a complete kind of a formula to understand what the present scenario is. But we would like to see that how Gandhi did, what he did during his time, that how it can be useful to understand the present context. So that is what I can say. I don't want to give you any kind of a complete answer by saying, still I'm also thinking and struggling to locate, because I can't say that, look, Gandhi here is a complete answer. No. I mean, things are different, things change, times are different, situations are different. So I think we need to understand that how you take up one particular concept and issues of what Gandhi says and try to extend it. You try to extend it to understand the present contemporary issues by using Gandhi. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sorry? Yes?
I would actually like to take this opportunity and discussion and interact with Professor Das. who's, if I may say, who's the most celebrated media theorist in India in the field of media and communication. I'll introduce myself. I'm a research scholar from JNU, currently enrolled in the Center for Media Studies, working on the food imagery, sociology of signifying practices related to food and consumption.
Right. Great.
Food as a conveyor of subtext in popular media and symbolism in general.
Very good.
As an early stage researcher who's into the study of media and the political economy of popular media representation, it is very much unlikely that we don't refer to the works of Professor Das. While I was writing my MPhil, I distinctly remember referring to the book Media and Mediation, edited by Professor Das along with others such as Bernard Bell. So you see the concept of mediation is so important to the contemporary research in media, which I also try to explore in my own PhD.
Very good. Very good. I'm so glad. So glad.
Context of globalization, media and culture, reflexive social entities like selves, societies, and culture, he argues.
Very good.
Through mediation. In my own research too, I examine the specificities of media channels such as print and broadcast media to look into the ways by which these enable communication. So my point of inquiry, although it is not a question per se, but more of a general kind of discussion with Professor Das and members in the audience to probe into the ways the present day communication is enabled at the intersection of digital technology, rising consumerism, and infiltration of new media channels. It is in this context that I would like to know Professor Das's views on the concept of mediation and its origin, and secondly, the role of semiosis in communication, the realities in communication practices, and the polysemic meanings that they might hold. I mean, the way you also mentioned in the lecture that khadi as a symbol of resistance. So this is, this question is not directly related to the lecture that you just delivered, but in general, I wanted to know what are your views on the signifying practices in popular media.
I think, Rupali, you compel me to deliver another lecture. You compel me to deliver another lecture. I'm sure I would love to share it with you sometime. I remember that when we were developing that particular media and mediation, probably in Indian context in communication, that is much ahead of its time, because you know very well about the media scholarship in India. And that was my entire engagement in the media scholarship, being a sociologist, specialized in media, and trying to establish and develop a kind of a, what you call communication studies, which is missing, and you know it very well. So we more talk about, events and rather than looking at a studies orientation, giving a disciplinary character, what you call, it still remains as a field rather than a discipline. So there are a lot of intellectual engagements are. Anyway, this is not a forum to share all these. Maybe that sometime again we'll get an opportunity to interact and talk about it. I think mediation is actually the context of media and mediation is actually, the first volume was actually on politics. If you see the introduction itself, the first volume was itself of politics and how the shift in the politics itself. So, so how politics becomes mediated. That is the context of, and now today you talk about information technology, IT and politics, how suddenly government to governance. So there is a massive shift which has taken place within political science, and the way politics has been, presented to us, and the way the spatiality and the politics and the way, from a city agora or a democracy in the Greeks context of democracy to the present context of democracy, there is a long trajectory and shift. So in that context, how the mediation itself plays a very important role. What are the forces in the process of mediation? I think that we missed. So this is where our engagement with media and democracy that actually opens up a Pandora box. That opens up a Pandora box that how we connect media and democracy. In fact, some of the interesting readings where they would be talking about now we live in a time which we call it's a monitoring democracy. We say that it's a monitoring democracy. John Keane, in fact, talks about that it's a monitoring democracy, and democracy is continuously monitored. Monitored, you know that it's a monitored. So there are, I'm sure, there will be a lot of engagements. But unfortunately, my purpose was that within political science, that media is not very seriously addressed the issue. In fact, if you see the past couple of volumes when ICSSR was bringing out all these decennial reports, I was saying that why they're not sensitive to media questions and media issues. In fact, whole election, look at media election and election, we find that political communication is a very important field, is a very, very important area which has never been addressed, like elections, or even we say election. Political communication is not about election per se. It's not about election per se. It's about agents, structure, in different ways that you engage within political communications. That's a very campaign is one. So it's a very, very broad field that which has never been much talked about or addressed. So I think there is a much to be done. There's much to be done to bring in because you people are the future. I mean, where you need to see that how that you need to more and more work on such areas so that you contribute creatively to the field so that the communication as a discipline emerges. Otherwise there is a chaos, so suddenly it's like there is a saying that when mass communication as a discipline was introduced across the world, the speed in which it was departments opened up, as one of the leading Chicago scholars said, inertia of the past, and the shock of the new. So already there was an inertia in the past where hardly there was any contribution. And suddenly, anytime anything happens in television and media, that gives us a shock. So we say, oh, something happened. But we've never done much scholarship in the history in the past. So that is where it gives a disciplinary character. And there is another statement I would like to sum it by saying, um, when the discipline expanded in India, it was actually from a self-conscious creation to endless recreations. Now you can imagine. Initially, whole department, after compartmentalizations, journalism departments coming up. So there was a self-consciously you want to make a distance from other social sciences and others. To endless now, there is a recreations without serious thinking about it. So I think that I'm more working on disciplines and pedagogies now. Maybe that sometime we will share, we'll talk. Thank you. JESNA, can we close now?
So thank you very much, sir, for this detailed presentation and answering. So we still have some questions posted to ask, but dear participants, because the time given to us is over, so I request the participants to please share their questions at gnduscity@gmail.com if they want to get an answer from Professor Ram. So we will facilitate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we will facilitate this in getting your questions answered from here. So with this, I announce the end of this session and begin with the formal vote of thanks. So Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir of Guru Nanak Dev University, Professor Dr. Jashpal Singh Sandhu, Dean Academics Sir, Registrar, HOD of Sociology, Director SICI, Professor Das, and the participants. I feel honored to propose the vote of thanks to conclude the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute Golden Jubilee Conference and Lecture Series commemorating the Golden Jubilee of the city and 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi on the topic Gandhian Thought and Practice, Perspectives from the Intellectual History of Communication by our distinguished speaker, Professor Biswajit Das from Center for Culture, Media and Governance, Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi. I hereby present the vote of thanks for today's lecture on behalf of Department of Sociology and the host, Dr. JESNA and myself, I express deep sense of appreciation for the support and encouragement provided to us in organization of this event. So at the outset, we are highly appreciative of the leadership, encouragement, and extensive support provided by the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Guru Nanak Dev University, Professor Dr. Jaswal Singh Sandhu. We express sincere gratitude to Vice Chancellor Sir for sparing his time from his busy schedule for guiding us in all the possible ways. So thank you very much, sir. You have always been a source of motivation and energy to us. We also record our deep sense of obligation to the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, a binational institute facilitating scholarly research and exchanges between India and Canadian universities, cultural organizations, government bodies, and United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and its entire team for awarding this Golden Jubilee Conference and Lecture Series 2021 grant to us to commemorate the Golden Jubilee of SICI. So it is equally a very special occasion for us, and we express our sincere gratitude to the entire team of SICI, especially the director, Dr. Pratikol, Program Officer, Mrs. Reshma Rana, for all the help they have extended to us for organizing this event and the promptness in addressing our queries and concerns. So I would like to place on record also our hearty thanks to our distinguished speaker, Professor BISWAJIT for such an illuminating, wonderful presentation. And we are greatly, we are extremely grateful to you, sir, for accepting this invitation. And we look forward for more such engagements in future with you and your department.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. So we also express gratefulness to Dean Academic Research, Registrar, various respective deans, head of various departments of Guru Nanak Dev University and affiliated colleges for joining us for this event. I also thank the head of the Department of Sociology, Guru Nanak Dev University, Dr. Rajesh Kumar, and Dr. Devi, Dr. Parihar, and especially we thank our office staff, Mr. Shastri Singh, Mr. Shastri Singh, for the technical support which they have provided to us. We are extremely grateful to Professor Christian Bartol, President, Gandhi Information Center, Research and Education for Non-Violence, Berlin, and Gandhi Peace Foundation, Nepal, Mr. Sandeep Kumar Singh, Co-Director of Yuva Samvad, New Delhi, Mr. Muhammad Janai Abedin, SRRD, Bangladesh, Mr. Polska Chakrabarti, Mr. Kumar Vijay Pratap Singh, IGP, STF, Special Task Force, Punjab Police, Mr. Sushil Bose, PCS, Excise and Taxation Department, Professor Gurpreet Bhai, Professor Paramjeet Singh Jatt from Department of Sociology, Professor Amandeep Bhai from Department of History, Guru Nanak Dev University, and Dr. Urvashi fellow from Delhi government for joining us for this event. So our special thanks are also due to the participants out there who are digitally connected to us on various social media platforms like Google Meet, YouTube, and have joined us from various institutions and diverse backgrounds. We appreciate your keen interest in this lecture. We also acknowledge the assistance of the administrative staff of grants and account section of Guru Nanak Dev University and various departments for the smooth and speedy release of funds and timely approval. Last but not the least, we also show appreciation and gratitude to our research scholars, Mr. Ranveer Gautam, Mr. Harpreet, Ms. Alina, Ms. Deepika, Ms. Kiran Preet, Mr. Sajinder from Guru Nanak Studies Department, and Ms. Riddhi from Jamia Millia Islamia, who have helped us in the organization of this event. So I thank you one and all, and I wish you a very good day. So have a good day. Thank you very much for joining us for this lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, one and all.